Alright, so BioWare just revealed an interesting twist on character progression, and yeah, the skill trees in Dragon Age Veilguard are much bigger than we thought. We have the first details on how class and skill systems work, plus how character backgrounds will also affect gameplay with unique bonuses. In fact, the developers confirmed they've taken quite a few hints from games like Final Fantasy XII, so we have lots of new info to go over. Also, if you find this video useful, feel free to subscribe and activate that notification bell. It really helps me out a lot in knowing what types of videos you guys like watching. But that being said, we have a very extensive interview once again with the game's director, this time around for RPG side, taking a much deeper dive into RPG systems, skill trees, and being inspired by Final Fantasy XII. All information not present in the gameplay reveal. So on the question about how deep the RPG progression goes, the answer is incredibly deep actually. So if I were to contrast Mass Effect versus Dragon Age for instance, I really view Mass Effect as an action RPG. Big action, minor RPG. We're almost the total inverse of that. So a few missions in, you unlock the skill tree right away. Every level up, you gain skill points of course. The skill tree is absolutely enormous and it is bespoke for your class. So when we talk about the specializations, we know that the skill trees can be overwhelming to players as well. So the way she explains it is that when you unlock this, imagine almost a gigantic spider web like visual. And if I'm a mage, right at the very center is the core of the mage kit. And there are some parallels here being drawn throughout the interview with Final Fantasy X and 12 way of handling the skill system, specifically Final Fantasy X's sphere grid, but it seems that BioWare has taken more inspiration from Final Fantasy XII, which I'm all up for. So yeah, that seems to be an all-time favorite for the game's director. The level of ability selection, passives, and in our case also traits, I would say the amount of customization is more analogous to that. The organization is more similar to the sphere grid. So the way I'm reading this is that we're going to have a lot more options the way it was in Final Fantasy XII, but it's organized in a more sphere grid like how it was in Final Fantasy X, which I mean sounds really awesome. It does seem that this way we can get very interesting ways to access subclasses as well, as you're going to see in just a little bit. But what we've done though is to make it more accessible in that each of the specializations is on the outer edge of the grid. So let's see how this is explained a bit further in the interview. Because as you're going to see, we can start from the center, but then we can work outwards to different subclasses. However, we can actually take different routes to that, even like for example, focusing a bit more on damage or focusing a bit more on defenses and other aspects of combat as we're heading towards a specific subclass. So she gives an example. I know where I'm going to start. I have an idea of which specialization looks or sounds the coolest, and that really aids players in charting their course so that it's not just lost all to the wilds. Furthermore, we even put some UI helper labels along the way, so it is divided into 3 sections in addition to the specializations. So for example, in the case of the warrior, you have a section that's more defense oriented and one that's more weapons oriented, and there's one that's more ability oriented. So what you might do trying to get to, say for example, the Reaper specialization is rather than going through the defense into Reaper, I'm going to go down through the ability into Reaper. Which sounds like you can almost have 3 different types of Reapers to play with, maybe some that focus a lot more on attacks or some that have a little bit more into defenses. I do wonder, however, if we can also branch into other subclasses because it definitely seems to be the case. However, there are some answers on how soon we can reach this in the game. So on the question on how often we're gonna get new stuff, the answer is as follows. So the skills are unique per class. Every level you get is a skill point, and there are other side activities to get skill points as well. We are very player friendly. You can refund your last and refund the whole thing. We have a level cap of 50, and one of my frustrations with more other games that had similar skill tree system is that getting into the specialization might take absolutely all of your skill points and then you have nothing else. We are the exact opposite. You get into your specialization about mid-game and then you can really branch out. So it sounds like we're navigating a pretty robust system that has a lot of ways to personalize and extend our character capabilities. It seems that we're getting both active and also passive abilities, just like in the previous Dragon Age game. And it also sounds like we can still dip our toes into multiple subclasses from the way I'm reading this. So coming up with some strong combinations in there to facilitate or buff up certain abilities sounds like it's still on the menu, which I'm all up for because Dragon Age Inquisition, the way they handled that was already really great, despite not having too many skills to begin with, but it was still achieving some very great results. But they also detailed a bit how party member skill trees work, and it seems that it's going to be somewhat different compared to Inquisition. So they do all have unique skill trees. Yeah, what we don't want is to overwhelm the players, so their skill trees are organized around their individual abilities. So when you unlock their full suite of abilities, each one has a skill tree full of choices where you can get autonomous usage or lower the cooldowns or add additional effects to the abilities, which to me kind of sounds like they're mostly centered towards passives rather than actives, because she further explains each follower, each companion has 5 core abilities. There are decisions you can make along the way that add mechanical changes to each ability. And we have an example here with Bellara and Neve, which are both mages, both of the main companions we get to have in Dragon Age Veilguard, so they share 2 core mage abilities between each other. However, the other 3 are class or character unique. Neve, for example, is an ice mage, Bellara is not. So Neve is going to have ice specific abilities that are unique to her. So comparing this with Inquisition, for example, which I'm going to assume most of you played, it seems that the Veilguard, yeah, the side character specializations are a bit more limited, but at the same time it feels like those options are more unique and focused. And this might also translate to the choices being more impactful, especially in combat. I'm not going to lie, I kinda liked the Inquisition liberty to like just craft your side characters the way you wanted. Quite refreshing, I really liked that aspect of the game. I hope that still happens in here too, albeit it's obviously going to be somewhat more limited. But maybe these abilities, which are unique even within the same classes but for different characters, might provide some more interesting choices. Which also begs the question, what if you really enjoy a character's companionship but you don't really like its available options? Maybe in the example of the Frost Mage or the mages, one is Frost, one is not. Frost mages may be very strong and very useful at CCing and stunning and freezing targets. What if you really like that build but you don't have it accessible on a different mage character that you really like? I guess we're gonna wait and find out. But beyond that, we do have some information on how backstories actually influence how you play. In fact, you're going to get passive skills depending on the faction that you choose in the character creator. So we have this interesting article over from Eurogamer, which goes in a bit more detail on the character creation process and of course the selection of difficulty settings. So there are 5 categories to work your way through when creating a character, the article explains. This includes lineage, appearance, class, faction, and playstyle, each with a range of subcategories within them, such as the 8 subcategories within the head subcategory of your appearance alone, which yeah, definitely sounds extensive. But lineage dictates things like your race, the usual Dragon Age quarter elf, Qunari, human, and dwarf, as well as your backstory, a long-standing fan request. Backstories in fact include things like factions, some returning, some new, which offer 3 distinct buffs each, like being able to hold an extra potion or do extra damage against certain enemies, and the odd reference in dialogues. So it's not just the extra dialogues that we might get with members of the same factions, we also seem to get these 3 distinct buffs that might have a pretty big impact, especially as you start things on. So yeah, maybe that extra potion might not be the biggest buff of them all, but having extra damage against a certain type of enemy might just do it. Like for example, having extra damage against dragon enemies, maybe there are some high-end, high-level zones that we get to farm, or maybe go in and get some extra loot, and this might help a ton with that. Going with that specific backstory and faction might help a ton with that. In any case, we also talked about difficulty settings from the character creation. Yes, that's actually a thing. So beyond the 3 standard classes that we get, including warriors, mages, and rogues, which of course make a return. Yeah, but within those, there are 3 more specializations for each. Like, for example, we know that the rogue gets the duelist, saboteur, veil ranger, but there's also the playstyle settings beyond this as well. So this includes custom distinct difficulty settings for options as granular as the parry windows. That means players who might fancy a typical playstyle but struggle with the finer points of combat can give it a go. Say for example, you would really like to give the rogue class a go and play as a duelist, which was the subclass we saw in the initial reveal gameplay. Yes, you can still go in there and still try the class out because you can fine-tune aspects such as the parry windows. Now, personally, I'm not going to fiddle with them because I just like to have a challenge, but I can see those who really are passionate about the game or maybe want to try out different classes but always found them off-putting for some of these smaller specific reasons. I like the fact that they included these options for those who might want to branch out into different playstyles. There are further explanations on providing different roles for your party mates in this Eurogamer article right here. So especially when it comes to like the skills you can set them to have. Yeah, you can set up specific companions with certain kits, from tracking specific enemy types to being more of supporting healers, with the return of the much requested healing magic or flexible all-arounders. So yeah, it definitely sounds like you can have somebody fit different roles in the party. One of the biggest complaints of the initial reveal gameplay was that your companions seem to not do much compared to you, the player character. Well, that was early in the game as well, but also maybe because yeah, that save didn't reach the point where you can select these options, these specific tracking enemy types that yeah you can have in your party to support you or to provide extra damage. It seems like they were just at a default state. Abilities themselves, meanwhile, can chain together, and there's a very awesome example over here that I like, with some apparently elaborate results. We have another example here because BioWare really likes those chain combos. So the example given was one companion using a kind of gravity well attack that just sucks enemies together, and another one using a slow that kept them all in place. And then you can unleash a big area of effect attack to catch them all at once. In practice, the pause system in particular looked like a method for players who want a bit of challenge, stopping to think and act tactically. So it definitely sounds like a very strong setup you can create. I was kind of worried you can only make like 1-2 setups, like have a primer and a detonator, but no, it seems like you can have chain combos like these between all the 3 party members, which sounds very enticing. So that still sounds somewhat more complex than we initially anticipated. It's not just the 3 abilities that we can map in the middle of the screen. We also have the other 3 per each other character in our party, so that's total of 9 abilities that we can chain together, and that's besides the fact that we of course have the dodges, the parries, of course the jumps, and also light heavy attacks. There's also the explanation with some of the specific resources we have to manage, including for the rogue, which uses momentum. This is something that you build up as you land consecutive hits, and each will always have a ranged option. So each class actually seems to have a ranged option. We saw of course the rogue in this case using the bow and the arrow. And I'm particularly a fan of the hip fire option we saw for the rogue's bow, letting you pop off arrows from the waist like a barely concentrating Legolas. Warrior meanwhile can lob their shields at enemies and apparently can build up an entire playstyle around that using the skill tree, which sounds like you can build up a Captain America sort of build for warriors. I'm definitely interested in that, dude. It sounds like they are going in a somewhat interesting direction and a lot more complex than we initially anticipated. So again, until we actually see the Q&A tomorrow, and maybe hopefully they will answer these questions, it seems that for now there is potential for some great comboing, great builds out there, and some great setups still in the Veilguard. That is it pretty much for now. I'm gonna follow up soon with some more info on some of the other stuff that has been discovered recently. So if you want to stay up to date with everything Dragon Age, the Veilguard related, make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe, and activate that notification bell. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.